extremely pleased to have him. He's been a great supporter of the industry and of TTF and, of course, the regional tourism and transport markets as well. And that's the Honourable Michael McCormack, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development, and without a doubt, the greatest gentleman in the federal parliament. Such a nice man. The Deputy Prime Minister will be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on aviation and transport, obviously, but we welcome whatever nuances David draws out of the conversation. So over to you, David.
All right. Well, Minister, thanks very much for doing this and for being with us. Perhaps we should start with a bit of a big picture sense of where you see the economy at and where you see it going, where the government sees it going. I mean, obviously, as discussed there, to describe this as one of the toughest years we've faced as a nation on the health and the economic front is really an understatement. And it is a rollercoaster. I know there's no crystal ball here, but give us a sense of when you see the recession ending, recovery and growth resuming, and what the government is doing to hurry that along.
Yeah, look, thanks, David. And it is difficult to have that crystal ball in front of us to know when exactly the recession, as you put it, is going to be over. Look, we have put in place measures that have been ever evolving, as you understand. Originally, we put in aviation measures. Well, we've extended those. We put in JobKeeper and JobSeeker assistance measures. We've extended those. And so as the situation has unfolded, we have as well changed the method and the assistance levels to which have been applied to the economy, because this isn't just a global health pandemic, it's also a pandemic on the economy, so to speak. And so it requires good governance. It also requires collaboration with the states. And whilst the last few days they've become a little bit untidy, still there is that cooperation on a larger level between the states, and that, if anything, has to continue, because if we're going to get through this, we can't get through it just as one government. We have to get through it not only through the National Cabinet, but with everybody working together.
Yeah, and I want to come back to what you mentioned there about some of the tension just this week around border closures, what Queensland just announced yesterday, banning Sydney-siders and so on. But just sticking with economic recovery, I mean, as you say, no crystal ball, could we be still in recession until the end of this year, or do you see that coming to an end in the final quarter?
Oh, look, we could well do that. I mean, we only recall back in February, March, when the original estimates of the numbers of people who would not only contract the virus but indeed die from it were way in advance of what we've actually seen. And whilst Australia mourns for those 176 or so families who've lost loved ones, the experience overseas has been way beyond that, tens of thousands of people tragically passing away. And so, yes, these economic implications could well be with us this Christmas, well beyond that. But we'll work through it. And we'll work through it on the back of our strong resources sector, iron ore still being over $100 a tonne. Agriculture has continued at a pace. And so regional Australia is keeping up its end of the bargain. We need to be our best selves when it comes to doing all the things that the Chief Medical Officer and others have asked us to do. But we'll get through this, David.
When it comes to the movement of those goods, when it comes to freight, when it comes to the economies of regional Australia being able to get goods to market and so on, I mean, how frustrating are some of the border closures? I know some of them the federal government agrees are necessary, but, as mentioned, Queensland now saying no more anyone from Greater Sydney from Saturday will no longer be able to cross the border there. Other states, of course, have hard border restrictions still in place. What's this meaning for those regional economies and the frustrations for the freight industry in particular?
Oh, absolutely. I just got off a call from the Australian Trucking Association, Ben Maguire and people right around the nation telling me their difficulties. Now, we've adopted a protocol, a consistency across states, but we've had a few little implications with that just in the last 24 hours. There have been situations where truck drivers have been asked to test every 7 days. Well, you try backing up a B-double to the back door of a hospital or a respiratory clinic to get a test. You try, if you're driving a fuel tanker, to be able to do that where you can't actually leave your rig. It's very, very difficult. We're working through that.
I was reading this morning, right? So you're talking about the Victoria-New South Wales border, which has, thousands of trucks.
And South Australia and Queensland.
And South Australia, right.
Yep.
So they have to get a test every 7 days, regardless of whether they have symptoms or not. And how long? It usually takes, a couple of days to get a result back. So what does that mean in practice?
So we're working through that to get consistency, because obviously it's not going to be possible. And so what we're going to be trying to do is set up some clinics on the major highways. It can't be that a truck is going to have to go down side streets of country towns or indeed metropolitan centres larger.
So hang on, you will have drive-through truck stop clinics on the Hume Highway.
I'm going to be having those discussions. I've only just finished the meeting, going to be having those discussions with health authorities, with state health authorities, with transport ministers around the country again this afternoon to see what we can do, because if states are going to bring in protocols or change the national protocol such that truck drivers are going to be asked to do things that they weren't last week, then we're going to have to put in measures in place to help those truck drivers so that they're not stuck in 5-kilometre queues.
Do you think, because this is New South Wales Transport that's put in this new rule, have they gone too far?
They're doing what they think is needed for their own people. And I appreciate that all states have that, want to be able to be seen to be doing the right thing by their own people. But we've said all along that these border closures, if they're going to be in place, then there has to be some common sense and some practical measures applied so that we can continue the flow of transport, of goods, and that, of course, sensible measures are put in place. We understand that states have control over their own jurisdictions. We do. But they need to be practical measures, and we need to be able to get, for instance, David, seasonal workers across the border to be picking the fruit off the trees. In the Sunraysia at the moment, it's a season where there's a lot of fruit coming into ripeness, and unless it's picked, then it will be, unfortunately, either left on the trees or left to rot on the ground. So we can't afford to have that.
Just on that point, because I was just thinking about this too, with border closures. I know a lot of farmers who need their fruit, their produce picked. What's happening there? How are the workforce shortages going to be addressed?
Spoke to the Agriculture Minister in New South Wales, Adam Marshall, late last night. There's a protocol that just needs to be ticked off by New South Wales that will allow those New South Wales workers to be able to go across into the Sunraysia, into Mildura, to pick the fruit. So it's only potentially hours away, and we'll get that situation sorted. And this is the case with the whole COVID situation. Things have unfolded, not by the day but by the hour, and the Commonwealth Government has been in there and showing leadership the whole way to get them sorted.
Let me come to the infrastructure question. I know even before this crisis came along, you were under pressure to spend more on infrastructure from the Reserve Bank Governor, amongst others. You have, I know the Prime Minister was talking this week about bringing forward a whole bunch of projects. He's talked about this with the state leaders through the National Cabinet. Give us a sense of where that's at. What are some of the projects that are going to be fast-tracked to try and stimulate a bit more activity?
Oh, for instance, the Western Sydney Airport is very much boots on the ground at the moment, and that's one of the projects certainly listed for doing just that. We've got Inland Rail. The Narromine Park section has been completed. There are other sections within New South Wales as part of the 13 sections for that 1,700-kilometre corridor of commerce, which we can put more people on the ground, and we can do the sorts of things that we need to. But there are projects right across Australia, indeed, not just major projects, David, but as part of the local roads and community infrastructure that each and every one of the 537 councils across the nation are benefiting from $500 million stimulus package, that they can put money into local roads, which makes such a difference for local procurement, small business and local workers.
And look, sorry to jump in there. I'm sure that's true, and these projects are worthwhile. They're pre-existing projects. I'm just wondering, some say we really need to think after a recession about big, new nation-building projects. We had Snowy Hydro coming out of the war. Is there anything of that scale that you would imagine the government getting into?
We want to build dams. I'm the National Party leader who said that I want to build more dams. I was at Stanthorpe just the other day, the Emu Swamp Dam. We moved a bit of dirt around there. Want to work with the Queensland Government. Want to build more dams in the north, Urana, Rookwood, Hewenden, all those sorts of projects. We've got business cases either done or in the throes of doing. Established the National Water Grid, about to announce the people who are on that particular board. We want to make sure that if we can preserve and store more water, then we can have it then for the dry times. Because we know in this nation that it's drought followed by flooding rains, need to store and harvest that water when it does rain for those dry times, which will obviously come again.
A couple of other things. The aviation sector, I've got to ask you about this. Of course, it's been brought to a standstill by what's going on. We have to see Virgin get back up and running. Thousands of Qantas workers stood down. Those who still lost their jobs, those who still have a job relying on JobKeeper, that you're reducing the payments they're getting on JobKeeper in a couple of stages. So is there more in the works? Is there more that you could signal might come in the budget, perhaps, for the aviation sector?
Well, we have certainly extended the domestic air network services. We have extended the regional air network services, and we've made sure that we've invested heavily in not only remote airstrips but also regional airports, tarmacs, runways, taxiways, that sort of thing. And look, there may well be more in the budget. Certainly, I know Josh Frydenberg is working very diligently on that now, and as the Infrastructure Minister, I'm pushing hard on getting even more money for infrastructure and bringing more money forward. Already $100 billion, a record amount of money that's ever been spent by a government on infrastructure across the nation. And when you couple that with what individual states are doing, there's a big push to get boots on the ground and the sort of infrastructure, roads, rail, airports.
And is infrastructure your priority then, if we're looking at what more aviation needs rather than the workforce? Is there a danger here that too many airline workers are going to transition into other sectors and you'll lose that strength, that core of the aviation sector when it does come back online?
We're not leaving the aviation sector behind, David. We certainly wouldn't do that. That's why we've put in place JobKeeper. That's why we've made sure that the assistance available has been sector-wide so that Qantas, Virgin, Rex, whatever the case might be, all those, whether they're the largest airline in the nation or indeed the smallest, we've certainly made sure that the assistance is available on a sector-wide basis.
You're down the assistance, so to be clear, it's going from 1,500 to 1,200, then it'll drop down further in January.
Well, we have to, and as more routes become available, as more the network expands with more travel starting up again, that will of course lead to commercial decisions by airlines to take up those opportunities, and they're already doing that. We're already seeing that. Of course, the Victorian outbreak is very unfortunate, and that has caused, as you could understand, quite a bit of anxiety in the aviation sector.
Final one, public transport. I think Bruce might have mentioned this earlier. Obviously, it's gone off a cliff as well during this crisis, and there is a concern that even once a vaccine's found, hopefully, and everything is back to normal, there's still going to be a real reluctance on the part of many Australians to use public transport. Does that change the pricing models, the need for government perhaps to invest more rather than the private sector to take a risk in new public transport infrastructure?
Well, public transport is very much the domain of state governments, and they will exercise the right protocols and social distancing on trams and trains and the like. And I've had good discussions on a weekly basis with the likes of Andrew Constance, Jacinta Allen and Rita Saffioti and others right across the nation, Mark Bailey in Queensland, for instance, and not only meeting up on a presence such as this, a telepresence every week, but almost on a daily basis. I mean, there's almost a bromance happening between Mark Bailey, the Labor Queensland Minister, and I at the moment, because we want to get things done and the public expect that. But we're certainly working towards making sure we've got the right infrastructure in place, the right measures so that people can feel safe to catch that public transport again. It's so important, David. We want to get people to work, and we want to get them to work in a congestion-free capital city basis, and that's why I know Alan Tudge is working so hard to do just that as the Urban Infrastructure Minister as well.
Well, just looking at the time here, Michael McCormack, thank you very much for talking to me, but I'll hand over to Margie now for a bit more of the Q&A from those watching.
Pleasure.
Thanks,
David.
Thank you so much, David. And thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Now I can go to the grilling that's coming from the people on the other end of this digital experience.
The grilling.
So, Minister, your thoughts on international travel. I mean, I think this probably qualifies as a look deeply into the crystal ball. How soon do you think it's likely that we're going to be seeing international travel taking on board what was in the Treasurer's economic statements?
Margie, it's probably not going to be a matter of from this end. It's probably going to be more a matter of what happens with the international experience. And I can't see that many countries are going to be opening up their borders anytime soon. Australia, yes, we're an island nation, so we can largely determine, the international travel arrangements. I spoke to the Canadian Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, yesterday about their experience with international travel. Very, very difficult for them. Of course, they're a country with a big land border with the United States. It's a little bit easier for us. We can largely control who comes in and the like, but I can't see international travel happening anytime soon with the situation as it's unfolding overseas.
But I think probably trans-Tasman bubble a little closer to home and a little more likely, and potentially some of those Asian destinations that have done a good job managing SARS previously.
Indeed.
Yeah,
look, and there's hope, and we've got to provide that hope, and we're certainly doing that. And I know the Prime Minister's talking with Jacinda Ardern and many Asian leaders consistently and constantly.
So just one more little aviation question, if I may. From your point of view, longer term, as we try and attract those routes back into Australia, once things have looked up and we're all ready to greet people again, we are going to have to sort of incentivise that process of bringing routes back into the country, and that I think is going to be a big challenge for state governments with support from the federal government. And
that is why we've put in place $1 billion for a relief and recovery effort, and tourism has largely benefited from that. And I know Bob Manning, the Mayor of Cairns, was saying only the other day just how little tourism there was in that beautiful tropical North City of his. We will get through this. Yes, there is going to need to be, of course, more assistance provided along the way for tourism and for other measures for infrastructure, and we're doing that, and we're looking at those options all the time.
So, look, just a question about the regions. You touched on Cairns. Could you give us a bit of a snapshot, because you're very focused on the great regions of Australia and how they recover from this process too. What's the sort of snapshot from towns like Wagga, for example? How are people faring?
Well, business, you'd be surprised that things in the regions are going a lot better than what sometimes is made out in the press. There are many jobs available in the regions, and it was only the other day the Regional Australia Institute provided a report showing that there are many jobs here, and there are many people, 65,000 in fact, over the period that they looked at, had actually moved from had actually moved to the regions rather than the other way around. So that's encouraging. There are good and positive signs in the regions. It's rained again, and so that changes the psychology when you've got green grass and crops growing around. And certainly there are great tourism options. I mean, we've spent $94.6 million on zoos and aquariums as part of the $1 billion relief and recovery effort. Now, that is going to help those zoos and aquariums, many of which are located in regional areas. We've spent a lot of money on regional arts. And so we want to have those festivals, those agricultural shows, which we've also invested heavily in, to be their best selves coming out of this. Many of them have been cancelled this year, but they'll be up and running again in 2021. And we look forward to many people visiting a regional location, because if there's one thing for sure, Margie, with international travel curtailed, people are going to have to spend their holidays dollars somewhere, and that best place to do it is in Australia. See Australia before you go and see the world.
Yes, brush off the bucket list. Now is the moment. And look, I would say, Deputy Prime Minister, that the industry is very cognisant of the fact that the federal government has really recognised the needs of both the tourism and larger transport industry as part of this process, and we have been very grateful for that focus. So thank you. And if I could just, in closing, ask you one other little sort of structural question. I think amongst the business community, there's a certain amount of we love the National Cabinet. It seems like such an efficient process. How are you finding the National Cabinet?
It's working well, and the Prime Minister and the 6 premiers and 2 chief ministers have been working collaboratively, and I think the public has appreciated the fact that as best we can as a nation, we've put partisan politics aside. I've done the same with my transport and infrastructure ministers, working on a weekly basis to see what we can get done, whether it's, as David Spears has said, public transport, or whether it's the big infrastructure projects and programs that we've put in place. We need to be able to work together collaboratively. Yes, there'll always be the partisan politics around election time, and that's just the nature of the game. That's the nature of the business. But by and large, the National Cabinet process has worked well. Pleased that the Prime Minister has also put 6 major subcommittees of that National Cabinet in place, of which transport and infrastructure is one, of which regional development is certainly going to have its say in any future National Cabinet process going forward. And we'll work towards building a better Australia That's what I think everybody expects, demands, and most of all deserves.
And on that terrific note, can I say thank you so much for joining us this morning,
Margaret.
Deputy Prime Minister. And we look forward to continuing to work with you. And thank you again for the open ear you've had to the issues affecting this industry. Thank you.
Thanks. Good luck with the forum.
Thank you very much.